Welcome to the Far and Beyond podcast, hosted by the Contracts and Fiscal Law Department at the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School. This podcast is for federal government attorneys navigating the complex intersection of acquisitions and fiscal law and policy. I am your host, Major Ellie Sewell.
I'm Major Ed Callahan.
And I'm Major Alana Hines. Together, we are your co-hosts. On this episode of Far and Beyond, we are deep diving into the Secretary of War's formal transformation of the Defense Acquisition System, the DAS, into the Warfighting Acquisition System, WAS.
If you've been keeping an eye on military acquisition, things are changing. The DAS is being replaced by the Warfighting Acquisition System, driven by the Executive Order 14265. The stated goal is putting the entire acquisition process on a war footing. So this transformation aims to remedy three systemic challenges that resulted in pretty slow acquisition delivery and fielding times.
I think it said unacceptably slow acquisition delivery and fielding times. I'm skeptical that simply renaming the system changes its DNA, especially since we are being directed to transition from a culture of compliance to one of speed and execution.
I think that's a great point and a great position of skepticism to come from. I think we can all name a few of them, but based on these executive orders, what are the key systemic issues that they are trying to address with this massive legal and regulatory overhaul?
So first is fragmented accountability. So there's no single leader has the necessary authorities to drive a program and urgently deliver results. Second, broken incentives that reward meeting every requirement and specification, creating a gold-plated system. And third, government procurement behaviors like unpredictable demand signals, which discourages industry investment.
According to the Secretary of War's memo pushed out on 7 November 2025, subject transforming the defense acquisition system into the warfighting acquisition system, the remedy is to instill a warrior ethos and relentlessly focus on speed. We're told that the Department of War is now a risk-based decision-making organization focused on meeting warfighting needs and requiring us to accept more risk.
And Alana, looking at that memo that you referenced, attachment to the acquisition transformation strategy is of particular importance for what we want to talk about today. It breaks down 5 pillars that they're doing it, right? And while we're discussing this, I do want to highlight this is a pretty dramatic cultural pivot. For those of us who have been in this field through the GWAT era, this is going to require some real rethinking about the acquisition process as we go through. So I encourage everybody to pick up this memo and to pick up that appendix. We're going to talk you through some of the pillars right now, but it's worth going through a read. This is such a massive cultural pivot. Focusing now on Pillar 1, what type of focus does that have to achieve these goals?
So Pillar 1 really focuses on the defense industrial base, rebuilding the arsenal of freedom. So the big thing here is we went from 51 defense contractors now down to 5 major ones. That's a huge reduction. So this is really focusing on that. So it aims to stabilize demand signals by pursuing bigger, longer deals, including increased use of multi-year procurements, long-duration contracting, and guaranteed purchase orders. So from a fiscal perspective, this requires working with Congress for authorization to pursue stable or fenced funding sources.
Those are major commitments. Furthermore, the plan includes increased due diligence for capital investments from programs like the Defense Production Act and industrial base assessment and sustainment funds. How does the government ensure rigor while rushing for speed?
So this enhanced due diligence process must assess critical areas, including strategic and defense mission alignment, financial and economic analysis, and risk assessment. So crucially, the process includes evaluating the most appropriate mechanism for recouping investments, such as potential contract inclusion of royalties on commercialization, patent licensing, cost sharing, and data rights management.
So those are some pretty big changes. Looks like they're aggressively trying to manage risk while getting some return on investment up front, which is unique, at least in the field of me looking and working in this field. I'll also like to point out from what you said earlier, from the fiscal perspective, requiring work with Congress for more stable or fenced funding perspectives. One of the reasons that Sec Army highlights that we lost so many primes along the way and narrowed down to these 5 is the lack of reliability in one-year funds. And we just came out of a long-term shutdown. And, companies, it's not reliable if all of a sudden we're not going to have the money to buy the things that we said we were going to early on. Now, one of the other interesting things that I saw on this was the go direct to supplier strategy. You guys have worked more in contracting than I have. How does this affect the contracting responsibilities?
So the Department of War plans to negotiate and invest directly with suppliers throughout the industrial base, not just through prime contractors to avoid pass-through costs and manage supply chain risks proactively. So this is really going to require establishing the contractual and resource mechanisms to smartly pursue development, production, sustainment of subsystems, parts, and components through expanded direct-to-supplier relationships.
Having the government act as the system integrator by going direct to supplier is a massive shift in technical and legal management responsibility. That integration risk is now shifting entirely to the portfolio acquisition executives, PAEs, and their teams.
So yeah, the risk management is why there's also a shift away from the requirements-based acquisition towards solution-based acquisition. The department will present operational problems and gaps, allowing industry to propose and demonstrate solutions through modeling or prototyping. I'm a little intrigued on how this is going to work, the solution-based acquisition. We're just so used to having very clear requirements written out when you put out a solicitation. So this will be interesting to see how they're going to move away from that to more of a solution.
And I think that's a great area that they're looking to address, and one that we've taught in a few of our seminars for our students that come through is how strict do you have to be leaves the government assuming the risk. How broad-ideaed, how end results driven you can be allows us to share the risk more with the companies that are out doing it, right? We have an end state that we want to achieve. Now surprise us with how you can get that end state, as opposed to when we're too specific. If it doesn't work, we own all that risk, right? They fulfilled whatever specific dimensions we put on the box. We own the box whether or not our stuff fits in it. If we tell them that we have X amount of things to ship, let them come back and tell us the best way to do it. But my next thought on that, when we're getting these, and I was just talking about risk shifting, how about bid protests? Because that's been, in my experience, the reason behind a lot of delays in getting some contracts executed. And as we're being more general in our requirements, is that going to open us up to more bid protests that are going to slow us down?
I think at the beginning, yes, especially when you're going from a very strict requirements where we have to follow these rules, how we're going to do it, specifically how we what we put in the solicitation is what we're going to do and how we're going to award, and then we're going to move away from that to solution-based. I think that's definitely opening up more to a protest risk, because it sounds more like an OTA is what they're talking about. Other transaction authority when they're saying a solution-based acquisition versus a requirements one. So I'm intrigued. I am intrigued.
I mean, that being said, the Department of War is in collaboration with Office of Management and Budget advocating for legislative change to reform the bid protest process in order to discourage frivolous protests. And the strategy they're seeking is enactment of a new statutory authority to permit the government to recoup or otherwise withhold profit or fee from an incumbent contractor if their protest is subsequently dismissed as legally or factually insufficient. So, I mean, there is an acknowledgement that protests are slowing things down right now. I mean, that being said, we've seen more and more contractors be successful even in the OTA realm, especially when they're seeking their relief via COFC.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because they only mentioned GAO protests, but we know there's been an uptick in COFC protests, but there's no talk about anything there about that. Not that I think they could do much because it's in the judiciary branch, but I just wonder if they're going to focus so much on GAO, they're just going to push everything over then to COFC, and we're going to be in the same boat still.
Right. And not to insinuate that it's free to put out a bid protest, but this kind of makes the incumbent put a little more skin in the game because it was in their interest to stall the new contract from coming in, and it's going to force these short-term, quote-unquote, bridge contracts that, now they're getting more time on the job. Making them put a little skin in the game will hopefully make them think twice about these when they're frivolous bid protests.
If they truly don't have grounds to protest.
I mean, that's true. I think the definition of frivolous is going to be really important.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Because what is frivolous to us might not always be frivolous to them.
Exactly.
So jumping into Pillar 2, the elevate and empower the acquisition workforce, this actually ties into, Alana, what you were mentioning, the new portfolio acquisition executives. And my understanding is that they're coming in to replace the old PEOs, and they're becoming more of a PAE. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So the PAE is the single accountable official for an entire portfolio of related systems. PAEs are empowered with expanded authorities for resourcing, requirements, and acquisition decisions. So the acquisition chain of authority flows from the Defense Acquisition Executive, DAE, to the Service Acquisition Executive, the SAEs, and then to the PAEs. So notably, PAEs have the authority to direct program outcomes, move money, and quickly adjust system features. Furthermore, the Department of War directs the organizational alignment of contracting officers to report directly to PAEs.
But giving PAEs authority to move money around more freely is really only viable if the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, or PPBE, reform efforts are achieved. And we know those reform efforts are ongoing and trying to expedite processes and streamline processes. But the department really must revise the guidance and seek necessary legislative relief to ensure flexibility within these PAE portfolios.
So one of the interesting things I saw on here, too, is that it's mandating longer tenures for that. So what about these personnel policies? What kind of changes are they mandating there?
So the department intends to extend the PAE program manager tenures to a 4-year minimum, with 2-year extensions to match delivery cycles. This requires assessments of Title X personnel statutes, Act Demo provisions, and direct hire authorities, and may require legislative proposals to meet the intent. But the incentive compensation is being tied directly to capability delivery time and mission outcomes.
And that risk assumption is why the Capability Trade Council replacing the configuration steering boards is so critical. The CTCs will empower PAEs and PMs to drive needs-based discussions and validate trades.
Yes, the PAEs via the CTCs are empowered to waive technical standards and other certification requirements not mandated by statute or safety to prioritize time to field.
That waiver power is where we, as attorneys, are going to play a critical role in ensuring that clear documentation exists, that the PAE determined that the trade was prudent and legally sound. The CTC overhaul involves revising existing guidance that's derived by statute.
Okay, so Pillar 1, rebuilding the arsenal of freedom, we're working on our defense industrial base. Pillar 2, empower the acquisition workforce. Now we're talking internally and changing our acquisition personnel along the way. Pillar 3 talks about maximizing the acquisition flexibility. If they want to move fast, what specifically is being targeted in this regulation landscape?
So the goal is literally to slash rules down to only what is absolutely vital. The DOW is undertaking a complete and revolutionary overhaul of the Federal Acquisition Regulation and the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation supplements. They aim to reduce documentation to statutory minimums.
The infamous FAR overhaul.
So do you think the FAR overhaul is going to speed up the process?
I mean, not unless Congress becomes involved. The main process is still there. I mean, the statutes is what controls how we do our contracting. So until the statutes change, I don't think things are going to get sped up much. We can take out some words, but the same how we do things is still there.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's going to have to be not only a regulatory, but a legislative approach. So that can't be entirely internally agency driven.
I do think it'll help, but I don't think it's going to make the strides that I think some people might be hoping it will.
Yeah. It seems the most disruptive legal proposal as part of this is the push to reduce or tailor the application of the Truth in Negotiations Act, what's commonly referred to as TINA. TINA requires contractors in non-competitive situations to submit their certified cost and pricing data in order to prove that their prices are fair and reasonable, which is acting as a crucial taxpayer protection law.
So if that's kind of a crucial taxpayer protection law, why are we targeting TINA for reduction? Seems counterintuitive to our core mission of protecting the public purse.
So the main argument is that TINA became a major source of delays. It added months, even years to contract negotiations. The department will pursue concurrent reductions in the application of TINA because the expectation is that competition in the defense industrial base will provide inherent cost and quality management, thus replacing the regulation. The department plans to expand the use of TINA light authorities and tailored application and contracting.
So I get that, we think that TINA is costing us money in terms of time, right? Or that having to produce that data might actually be driving up some costs because contractors are including that, in their proposal. However, banking on market forces to replace a taxpayer protection regulation does seem to be a pretty significant gamble. The main argument here is that the cost of delay is actually outweighing that risk of potentially overpaying.
Okay,
we need
that
to
makes
get
sense.
goods into the warfighters' hands.
Right, accepting a little bit more risk to get things out here faster. Yep, that makes sense.
Exactly.
So beyond TINA, they are directing the elimination of the Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System, JCIDS, and replacing the lengthy Analysis of Alternatives, AOA.
What are they replacing them with?
So they're replacing the analysis of alternatives with more practical approaches, experimentation and demonstration of existing or emerging technology, and competitive prototyping. Also, to align with industry, the Department of War is transitioning from the complex cost accounting standards unique to government contracting toward generally accepted accounting principles. This reduces burden and is intended to attract non-traditional companies.
Moving to Pillar 4, develop high-performance systems. The core technical requirement is the mandate to fully implement the modular open systems approach.
So the modular open systems approach, MOSA, I think I heard it referred to as before, and if I haven't, we'll now refer to it as MOSA. Why is that so critical from a legal and sustainment standpoint?
So MOSA prevents vendor lock and fosters competition throughout the entire life cycle of a weapon system. It requires using open standards so all companies can compete to integrate components.
For us, that means program managers must pursue software application programming interfaces and aggressively assert intellectual property rights to enable component-level competition. Specifically, the plan requires obtaining delivery of critical system interfaces with government purpose rights to enable modular competition and supply chain resiliency.
So that assertion of IP rights often comes at a higher upfront cost.
IP rights have become so important in the way we acquire technology, the way we license and use software when they go through. So much so that here at the schoolhouse, we just dedicated a full course to government rights in intellectual property that's kicking off this year.
Yeah, and the IP rights are important in terms of addressing those up front because they also impact the overall life cycle costs. And that's mentioned in Pillar 5, which is improving effective life cycle risk management, addressing sustainment. How are we ensuring that the government can maintain and repair systems?
So the department must plan for and acquire systems with the ability to conduct organic depot-level maintenance, repair, and overhaul. This requires PMs to conduct robust analysis, acquire the proper technical data and access rights during competitive phases, and align contracts to ensure the government can repair systems without relying solely on prime contractors. This is necessary to comply with laws, regulations, and policies that drive early and continuous production support planning of lifecycle requirements.
Yeah, this was mentioned in the FY25 NDAA, right? Wanting the ability to fix the equipment we have already purchased instead of waiting for a contractor. And I listened to an interview with Sec Army who talked about this, is because it's not cost efficient for certain contractors to produce less than 150 of any given widget. They're going to wait until we need 150 of those given widgets to produce them. And here we have equipment sitting in motor pools that we can't do anything with because we're locked into this equipment and waiting for it. Acquiring these technical data and access rights, that's just as high a priority as learning to write to repair, 3D print these items that we can get for $8 in the formation. Sec Army has highlighted that that's one of his priorities coming through.
Exactly. There's definitely an interplay between looking at data rights and life cycle. It's they're all part and parcel now. Ultimately, our job as government counsel is to operationalize the speed mandate while also managing the legal risk that's inherent in waiving requirements, tailoring regulations like TINA, and relying on streamlined contracts. That tension between achieving the 3 overarching outcomes mentioned in the memo and maintaining statutory compliance will be critical for government counsel over the next few years.
Absolutely, and this is our way to really be a value added to our commands. If we stay ahead of these changes, if we can start learning to do this to help our commands get these faster, we're going to be in the room every time. We're going to be value added, and that's our ultimate objective, is to help our commands get the equipment and the gear that they need at the speed as fast as possible. DoW has defined the problem. Acquisition is a warfighting function and must enable continuous adaptation. Legal and acquisition workforces deliver on that strategic imperative when we make sure that we're paying attention to changes, that we're anticipating the needs, and that we're out there in front of these issues trying to help them out. And in the line of anticipating the needs that our commands are going to have, T. Jaglick's Contract and Fiscal Law community on the Microsoft Teams pages, if you haven't joined it, join it. We just posted all the slides from the innovation seminars. It consists of input from subject matter experts from T. Jaglick's, OTJAG, the MIC, T2Com with DevCom contributing, and CLIP. We're trying to anticipate issues with all of our innovation seminars. This is a great place and a great resource for a lot of people to start.
Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Far and Beyond. Please make sure to follow us and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
We love to hear from our listeners, and in particular, we love it when our listeners are paying attention to what we have to say. So take a look at these Facebook pages, our LinkedIn pages. Let us know what you think. Feedback from the field is what lets us pick topics when we're going forward and lets us know what kind of issues we need to address for everybody.
The views expressed today are those of the presenters, not that of the Judge Advocate General Corps, the Department of the Army, Department of the Air Force, or the Department of War.